Nestled in the pristine valleys of Switzerland, surrounded by alpine peaks and crystalline lakes, a company was born that would one day come to dominate the way humanity eats, drinks, and feeds its children. On the surface, it began with innocence. A man named Henri Nestlé, a pharmacist by trade, who in 1867 developed a powdered milk formula to help save the life of a malnourished infant. His product worked, the child survived, and Nestlé's formula began to spread not just across Europe, but eventually around the globe. From a single act of compassion emerged the roots of a colossal enterprise. But as the decades unfolded, so too did a darker story, one not of compassion, but of profit at any cost. The rise of Nestlé from humble Swiss beginnings to becoming the world's largest food and beverage conglomerate is a tale not just of innovation and business acumen, but of power manipulation and a series of ruthless decisions that for over a century have shaped the lives of millions without their knowing. Behind its family-friendly branding, its pastel-colored infant formulas and bubbly water ads, lies a global operation accused of exploiting vulnerable populations, controlling essential resources, manipulating science, and leaving a trail of human suffering in its wake. To understand how we got here, we must go back not just to Henri Nestlé, but to the empires that followed him, the boardrooms where profit trumped principle, and the global markets where poverty became opportunity. Because Nestlé's journey into the shadows didn't happen overnight, it was deliberate, strategic, and above all, profitable. In the late 19th century, Nestlé merged with the Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company. At the time, Europe was industrializing rapidly, and populations were surging. Urban mothers disconnected from farms, and wet nurses turned to manufactured alternatives. Nestlé's infant formula was seen as a miracle, especially for women who couldn't breastfeed, or who worked long hours in factories. But while the original formula may have saved lives, what came next would begin a cycle of dependency, misinformation, and quiet devastation. As the 20th century dawned, Nestlé didn't just sell formula, it began aggressively marketing it. Mothers in Europe were shown advertisements suggesting that Nestlé's products were not just equal to breast milk, but superior. The message was clear: trust science, trust the company, trust the brand. This strategy would soon go global. By the 1970s, Nestlé was no longer a European brand. It had become a behemoth, spreading its products across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In many of these countries, Nestlé's baby formula was promoted in hospitals with company representatives dressed as nurses handing out free samples. New mothers, especially in poorer communities, were led to believe the formula was a modern miracle. But the free samples ran out after a few weeks. The baby's natural milk supply had diminished, and the family, now dependent, was forced to buy more. In regions without access to clean water, the powdered formula became deadly. Instructions were often in languages the mothers couldn't read. To stretch the product, some families diluted it with contaminated water. The result? A spike in infant malnutrition disease and death and outcome, Nestlé's internal reports allegedly predicted, yet the campaigns continued. Critics called it the baby killer scandal. Protesters called for boycotts, but the profits flowed and the corporation pressed forward. This was Nestlé's first true brush with global infamy, but it was far from its last. As the company diversified, so too did its ambitions. Coffee, chocolate, bottled water, frozen meals, cereals, pet food, medical nutrition, pharmaceuticals, Nestlé was everywhere. Few knew that a single corporation owned over 2,000 brands, from Nescafé to Kit Kat, from Gerber to Perrier. It quietly became the biggest food company in the world. In doing so, it turned natural resources into products, traditions into trademarks, and hunger into a business model. Nowhere is this more visible than in the bottled water industry. Nestlé realized early that while food was abundant, clean water was finite, and where there is scarcity, there is profit. The company moved swiftly, purchasing access rights to natural springs and aquifers across the globe. From Michigan to Pakistan, from France to California, Nestlé extracted billions of liters of fresh water, paying little to nothing for the privilege. In drought-stricken communities, where locals struggled for drinking water, Nestlé trucks rolled in daily to pump and bottle the supply. The defense were within our legal rights. And perhaps they were. But the question was never about legality, it was about morality. In Michigan's Osceola Township, residents fought Nestlé's water withdrawal operations for years. The community watched as aquifers dropped, creeks dried, and their voices were ignored. The company paid $200 a year to extract millions of gallons. In return, they sold it back to the public at hundreds of times the cost. Water, a human right, had become a product, and the people who needed it most were often the ones who could no longer afford it. This pattern repeated across continents. In Pakistan, farmers found their wells running dry. In Nigeria, communities accused Nestlé of bypassing environmental regulations. In drought-ridden California, during the peak of a water crisis, Nestlé continued operations in national forests, extracting what little was left. Again and again, profit eclipsed ethics. But water and infant formula were only the beginning. The company's chocolate empire is tainted by the exploitation of child labor in West Africa. Despite pledges to clean up their supply chain, investigations revealed that Nestlé sources cocoa from farms where children as young as 10 work with machetes in dangerous conditions. Many are trafficked. Few are paid. Most will never see the inside of a school. Yet the chocolate bars made from their labor are sold in air-conditioned stores thousands of miles away. When sued in US courts for profiting off child slavery, Nestlé argued that they could not be held accountable because the abuse didn't happen on American soil. The case reached the Supreme Court, and Nestlé won. The message was chilling: multinational corporations could benefit from abuse abroad and walk away untouched at home. And so the pattern deepened. A pattern of aggressive marketing, strategic lobbying, and calculated distance. Nestlé's public image remained polished, a company that feeds the world, nourishes infants, innovates health. But behind closed doors, the empire ran on a different code: extract, expand, and when challenged, deny. Internally, whistleblowers described a corporate culture obsessed with growth. Former executives told stories of sales goals overriding ethics, of scientists pressured to suppress inconvenient findings, of partnerships formed with governments that quietly stripped away local rights in exchange for investment. The deeper one dug, the more clear it became. Nestlé had evolved beyond a company. It had become a force, one that saw nations not as sovereign entities, but as markets. People not as citizens, but as consumers. Life's essentials not as rights, but as assets to be branded and sold. And yet few questioned it. Few knew the extent. That's the true power of Nestlé, its ability to operate in the open, hidden in plain sight. Through commercials showing smiling families' logos on baby food jars, corporate social responsibility reports that speak of sustainability and progress. All the while, it extracts water from dry lands, sells formula to hungry babies, and wraps exploitation in a candy wrapper. As we leave this first chapter behind, the question isn't just what Nestlé has done, but how it got away with it for so long. How a brand built on saving children came to be accused of endangering them. How a food company grew into a global empire, one built not just on innovation, but on extraction, manipulation, and a staggering tolerance for harm. Because what comes next is not just about marketing campaigns and boardroom decisions. It's about the power Nestlé holds over governments, over science, over the very systems meant to protect us. Part 2 will take us deep into the mechanics of this empire, the lobbying, the silencing, the science for hire. We will explore how Nestlé shapes not only what we consume, but what we believe to be true. This is not just a story about a company, it's a story about power, and it's only just beginning. To control a marketplace is one thing, to dominate a global industry is another. But to influence public perception, override government policy, and bend the rules of science, that requires something far more sophisticated than branding. It demands influence. Quiet, persistent, unapologetic influence. The kind Nestlé has mastered over decades, because behind every product on the shelf is an invisible system of lobbying, legal engineering, research manipulation, and strategic partnerships that enable one company to operate above scrutiny. Nestlé does not merely feed the world, it scripts the narrative of what the world should eat, drink, and believe. Let's begin with science. For generations, Nestlé has invested heavily, not just in product research, but in nutritional science itself. From sponsoring medical conferences to funding journal publications, the company has built an entire ecosystem where science conveniently aligns with its marketing goals. Consider the baby formula saga. When global health organizations began recommending exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of a child's life, Nestlé's response was swift and calculated. Instead of adapting, they challenged the narrative. They commissioned studies, some through third-party think tanks, others through nutrition departments that happened to receive generous grants. These studies subtly highlighted the risks of breastfeeding in impoverished areas where maternal health was poor or water quality suspect. The logic was circular. In places where clean water was unavailable, formula might be dangerous unless Nestlé provided clean water along with its product. And so they began to do just that, creating a dependency ecosystem where they provided both the solution and the problem. They funded nutritional educators in hospitals, particularly in the global south, who advised new mothers to combine breastfeeding with formula, often downplaying the fact that introducing formula early can reduce milk production. These educators weren't always doctors. Sometimes they were sales reps trained to present themselves as health professionals. But the damage was done. In country after country, breast milk was branded as backward. Nestlé formula was modern, clean, scientific. And every bottle sold translated into lifelong brand loyalty. This was not an accident, it was policy. Nestlé spent decades lobbying against WHO guidelines that promoted breastfeeding. They lobbied national governments to dilute regulations, working through trade groups and health committees. In some cases, they co-authored the very rules that were meant to govern them. They employed former politicians, hired regulatory experts, and built legal frameworks so complex that challenging them became nearly impossible. In 1981, the World Health Assembly introduced the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. It was a historic moment born out of mounting pressure from activists, scientists, and NGOs. The code wasn't legally binding, but it was a moral standard. Nestlé publicly agreed to comply, but behind the scenes, they continued the same practices, rebranded, relocated, legally sanitized. They launched new marketing terms. They emphasized maternal choice. They insisted their campaigns respected local laws. And they continued to target vulnerable populations with surgical precision. But Nestlé's reach extends far beyond infant nutrition. The company has taken a similar approach with virtually every product it touches, especially in the realm of sugar, salt, and ultra-processed foods. When health experts raised alarm bells about rising obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, Nestlé didn't pull back. They leaned in. They reformulated products just enough to claim healthier alternatives, often replacing one unhealthy ingredient with another less understood chemical. They labeled breakfast cereals as whole grain snack bars as source of fiber and sugary drinks as fortified with vitamins. The strategy is simple: distract from the damage by creating a health halo. And to reinforce that halo, they need credibility, which means science. Nestlé funds research that shows the benefits of moderate consumption of their products. They invest in academic partnerships, sponsor child nutrition campaigns, and provide materials to public schools in low-income communities. Their name is on food pyramids, exercise charts, and dietary guidelines across the world. And when independent scientists publish findings that contradict their messaging, Nestlé's PR machine activates. Articles are challenged, funding sources are scrutinized, spokespeople are deployed. And if all else fails, the dissenting voice is drowned in a flood of sponsored content and corporate white papers. But this is just one layer. Because to shape science is to shape perception. To shape policy, you need something more: access. Political access. Nestlé operates in nearly every country on Earth. To do so effectively, it maintains vast networks of political connections. Former government officials sit on its boards. Retired regulators become consultants. Lobbying budgets stretch into the millions. The company contributes to political campaigns, sits on trade councils, and funds development initiatives with strings attached. In Africa, Nestlé has offered to build infrastructure in exchange for relaxed regulations. In Latin America, it has partnered with ministries of health to co-author public nutrition programs. In Asia, It has donated to education and sanitation projects, while quietly lobbying against sugar taxes. In the United States, Nestlé has lobbied against GMO, labeling supported legislation that weakens labor protections and contributed heavily to campaigns that favor corporate deregulation. And when controversy arises, the company responds not with transparency, but with containment. Legal teams move fast. Settlements are negotiated. Whistleblowers are silenced through non-disclosure agreements. Reports are delayed, reshaped, or buried. In the rare case where a court demands accountability, Nestlé frames the issue as isolated, the blame as external, and the company as committed to improvement. Let's take the issue of child labor in cocoa production once more. Despite repeated exposés, lawsuits, and public promises, the problem persists. Nestlé has pledged to eliminate child labor from its supply chain since 2001. It has missed every deadline. It claims the issue is complex, and it is. But complexity does not absolve complicity. Independent audits show that children still work in dangerous conditions on farms linked to Nestlé suppliers. Meanwhile, Nestlé maintains plausible deniability. They do not own the farms, they do not hire the children, but they buy the beans. They drive the prices. They control the terms. And yet their public messaging speaks of progress. They highlight pilot programs, community investments, blockchain tracking. But these are often small-scale, time-limited, and publicity-driven. The truth is, the cost of solving the problem would cut too deeply into the profit margins. And so, like with water, like with formula, like with processed foods, the solution is only pursued to the point where the brand remains intact. This duality of public benevolence and private indifference is Nestlé's defining characteristic. It donates food during disasters, then lobbies against food security laws. It funds clean water projects while extracting millions of gallons from parched communities. It champions sustainability, even as it floods the world with single-use plastics. Nestlé's sustainability reports are sleek, filled with goals, percentages, and smiling children. But they rarely address the core contradiction that a company built on extraction, mass production, and global dominance cannot truly be sustainable, not in any meaningful way. And perhaps most insidiously, Nestlé positions itself as a partner in solving the very problems it helps create. Obesity. Nestlé offers low-sugar snacks. Malnutrition. Nestlé sells fortified cereals. Climate change. Nestlé pledges net zero goals while continuing to rely on carbon-intensive supply chains. It is the ultimate form of corporate judo, using the weight of criticism to strengthen the brand, to diversify products to increase relevance. But none of this would work without control over narrative. And in the 21st century, narrative is king, which is why Nestlé invests not just in science and policy, but in media. The company spends billions on advertising sponsorships and product placement. It partners with influencers, funds, documentaries, and underwrites news content. It monitors public sentiment in real time using data analytics to adjust messaging. Negative stories are countered with feel-good campaigns. Criticism is recast as misunderstanding. And consumers overwhelmed by noise often choose the comforting story over the complicated truth. So the illusion persists. Nestlé as the friendly brand, the childhood favorite, the household name. Most consumers know nothing of its political ties, its legal battles, or its influence over scientific norms. They don't see the lobbying, the lawsuits, the quietly rewritten laws. They just see coffee, chocolate, water, and cereal. And that's exactly how Nestlé wants it. Because the true genius of the Nestlé empire is not just its ability to dominate markets, but to do so invisibly. To convince the world that it is indispensable, that it is not a corporation exploiting systems, but a trusted provider improving lives. And in many ways it has succeeded. But what is the cost? In part 3, we dive into the consequences, the human cost, the environmental toll, the generations shaped by Nestlé's products and policies. From health epidemics to cultural erasure, from environmental destruction to corporate monopolies, we will uncover what happens when a single company grows powerful enough to shape not only what people consume, but what they believe is possible. The empire is vast, but its impact is deeper still. By now, the outlines of Nestlé's empire are no longer obscured. We've followed the paper trail through decades of policy manipulation, scientific interference, and public deception. But behind the curtain of branding, beyond the legal defenses and corporate PR, lies something far more disturbing: the consequences. The very real human and environmental toll that this machine leaves behind. Because every decision, every formula, tweak, every diverted river, or mislabeled box of cereal echoes far beyond the boardroom. In this chapter, we confront those echoes and the silent catastrophes they've fed. Let's begin where Nestlé often claims to bring nourishment in the kitchens and dining rooms of the developing world. For millions across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, Nestlé is not just a brand, it is nutrition itself. In communities where government services fail, where local food systems collapse, where hunger persists, like a slow poison, Nestlé steps in as the savior. Their powdered milk, fortified cereals, and instant noodles become staples. It seems like charity. It feels like access. But in truth, it's dependency-engineered dependency. In rural Brazil, researchers discovered that Nestlé had replaced local breakfast traditions with packaged chocolate drinks and sweet biscuits, marketed as nutritious. In South Africa, Nestlé's Maggi noodles became a dietary foundation for millions living in poverty, despite being low in protein and high in sodium. In the Philippines, instant coffee with sugar and creamer is sold in sachets with inspirational messages designed for daily consumption, even among children. These products are not created to nourish. They are created to dominate shelf space and pallets. And they do. The nutritional impact is catastrophic. Across the global south, rising obesity rates coexist with malnutrition. It's not just a paradox, it's the hallmark of ultra-processed food systems. Children grow up stunted, yet overweight. Adults face diabetes and hypertension in communities where healthcare is scarce. Governments struggle to educate against a tide of corporate marketing that paints these products as normal, convenient, aspirational. And Nestlé knows. Internal documents, leaked reports, and independent investigations all show that the company is fully aware of the health outcomes tied to its most popular products. Yet instead of reformulating meaningfully, they shift blame to sedentary lifestyles, to consumer choice, to cultural habits. They argue, we simply provide what people want. But the truth is more insidious: they shape what people want, then profit from the consequences. Let's zoom out, consider the environment. Nestlé positions itself as a leader in sustainability. Their websites showcase rainforest preservation projects, carbon neutrality goals, and recyclable packaging initiatives. But scratch the surface and the cracks appear. Because no amount of glossy commitments can cover the sheer volume of damage caused by Nestlé's global operations. The company is one of the world's largest users of plastic packaging, producing an estimated 1.7 million tons annually. Despite claims of recyclable innovations, the vast majority of Nestlé's plastic waste ends up in landfills, incinerators, or worse, oceans. In developing nations where waste management is often underfunded, Nestlé's sachets, wrappers, and bottles clog rivers, kill marine life, and poison water sources. Take Indonesia, for example. A 2019 audit by Break Free from Plastic found that Nestlé was one of the top plastic polluters in the country. Their single-use packaging, especially in small portion formats targeted at low-income consumers, is virtually unrecyclable. Yet these are the very markets where Nestlé expands most aggressively, marketing itself as a friend of the poor, while burdening them with the waste of the rich. But plastic is only one piece of the puzzle. Consider water extraction. We've already seen how Nestlé's bottled water business disrupts local ecosystems. But the ecological damage extends further. When Nestlé pumps water from a spring or aquifer, the surrounding environment suffers. Plants wilt, wildlife migrates or dies, natural cycles collapse. In Michigan's Osceola Township, where Nestlé extracted water for years, for pennies, environmental reports documented declining stream flows and stressed wetlands. In France, citizens protested against Nestlé's water rights in Vittel, where the water table dropped significantly due to over-extraction. Yet the company continued operations, citing its commitment to sustainability, despite its practices saying otherwise. And then there's agriculture. Nestlé's chocolate, coffee, and palm oil supply chains span vast monoculture farms, that often contribute to deforestation, pesticide use, and soil degradation. In Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, illegal cocoa farming in protected forests has been documented repeatedly. Despite public pledges, Nestlé's suppliers have been tied to these practices. In many cases, the company claims ignorance. But the truth is, simpler enforcement is weak because enforcement is expensive. And so the forests burn. The human toll of these environmental decisions is equally staggering. In some areas, communities no longer have access to safe drinking water. In others, traditional farming collapses under the weight of corporate competition. Indigenous populations are displaced, livelihoods are lost. And when protests arise, Nestlé's response is often silence backed by lawyers and security contracts. But perhaps the most insidious impact of all lies in something harder to quantify: cultural erosion. Food is more than sustenance. It is memory, identity, language, and community. Nestlé, through its global reach and calculated product strategies, has inserted itself into the culinary DNA of nations. Traditional dishes are replaced by instant mixes. Rituals of preparation are substituted with microwave convenience. Children grow up associating birthdays not with local sweets, but with Nestlé chocolate bars. Mothers are told their own milk is inferior to powder in a tin. In effect, Nestlé has colonized taste, not through violence, but through branding. Not with armies, but with mascots' jingles and brightly colored packaging. And in doing so, it has reshaped cultures from the inside out, one meal at a time. Nowhere is this clearer than in the phenomenon known as nutrition transition. As nations develop economically traditional diets, rich in grains, legumes, fruits, and vegetables, are rapidly replaced by ultra-processed foods, many of them made or distributed by Nestlé. This shift is not neutral. It is a public health crisis disguised as modernity. Rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes soar. Healthcare systems strain. Families spend more on medicine than they save on packaged food. And Nestlé continues to grow. The question arises, why don't governments stop this? The answer is complex, but not unfamiliar. Influence, lobbying, trade agreements, and the sheer scale of Nestlé's economic footprint make regulation difficult. In many developing nations, Nestlé is one of the largest employers, taxpayers, and investors. To challenge them is to risk economic fallout, and so governments compromise. They soften regulations, delay reforms, and invite the company to co-write solutions. And when activists rise up, when communities demand clean water, healthy food, or environmental protection, they face a machine far larger than any single protest. Nestlé has the lawyers, the PR firms, the lobbyists, the media contracts. It has patience. It can wait out scandal. It can rebrand and return. Time and time again, that's exactly what it has done. All of this raises a chilling possibility that Nestlé's real product is not food, but dependency. That its true innovation is not nutrition, but infiltration. And that its power lies not in what it makes, but in how it makes itself indispensable. As we near the final chapter, we must ask, is this the price of convenience? A world where one corporation shapes the diets, environments, and political choices of billions. A world where the illusion of choice masks the reality of monopoly. In Part 4, we confront the future. We explore the resistance, the lawsuits, the activists, the slow but growing awakening. We ask what accountability looks like for a corporation that spans the globe and whether it's even possible. Because if Nestlé is an empire, it must eventually reckon with revolt. The seeds of that revolt are already being sown. Empires, no matter how vast, no matter how clever or carefully constructed, are not immune to resistance. Beneath the polished surface of Nestlé's global dominance, a movement has been brewing, a network of activists, whistleblowers, scientists, consumers, and indigenous communities who, brick by brick, have begun to dismantle the narrative. Their goal is simple, though their path is not to make the invisible visible, to hold the powerful accountable, to demand a reckoning. It begins, as all resistance does, with truth. In the early 2000s, independent journalists and watchdog organizations launched investigations that pierced Nestlé's veil of corporate benevolence. The International Baby Food Action Network, IBFAN, exposed continued violations of the WHO's marketing code in dozens of countries. Reports detailed how Nestlé circumvented regulations, used deceptive language, and targeted mothers in vulnerable communities. These findings weren't whispered in academic journals. They made headlines, sparked debates in parliaments, and reignited the global Nestlé boycott that had first emerged in the 1970s. In West Africa, investigative journalists uncovered direct links between Nestlé's cocoa supply chain and child slavery. Images of children with machetes, scars, and sacks of cocoa beans flooded the media. Nestlé responded with pledges, with programs, with public commitments. But the deadlines came and went. In 2021, a landmark lawsuit in the US Supreme Court, filed by former child laborers, accused Nestlé of knowingly supporting a system of trafficking and forced labor. The court ultimately sided with Nestlé, citing jurisdictional limits. But the ruling only fueled public anger. In Europe, environmental groups launched legal challenges against Nestlé's water extraction. In France's Vosges region, activists uncovered evidence of overpumping falsified data and lobbying to silence regulators. In Vittel, residents watched their groundwater levels drop as Nestlé pumped for bottled water exports. Community protests gained momentum. Eventually, some local governments began to revoke extraction permits, not because Nestlé admitted fault, but because the resistance grew too loud to ignore. In North America, the state of Michigan became ground zero for a public awakening. As Flint residents faced poisoned tap water, Nestlé was quietly extracting clean groundwater from nearby communities for a fraction of a cent per gallon, then selling it back to the public under premium brands like Pure Life. The optics were catastrophic. Citizens petitioned, protested, filed lawsuits. While Nestlé defended its operations as legal and regulated, the moral rot was impossible to disguise. In 2021, the company sold its US and Canadian water business to private equity, quietly exiting the scandal, leaving no admission, no accountability. And still the movement grew. On university campuses, students pushed for divestment. In courts, lawyers fought for new precedents. On social media, documentaries and exposés went viral, shared by millions, sparking new waves of consumer awareness. Hashtags like meme boycott Nestlé, once fringe, trended globally. Supermarket shelves became battlegrounds where consumers made choices not just with their money, but with their values. But for all the noise, the resistance faces a sobering reality. Nestlé is bigger than any one story. Its reach is Hydra-like, multi-tentacled, resilient, always regenerating. Every lawsuit won, every scandal exposed, every boycott called, is met with corporate adaptation, new branding, new language, new sustainability promises. Nestlé does not ignore criticism. It absorbs, it digests it, and re-emerges with better PR, sharper talking points, and redesigned packaging. In 2020, Nestlé announced that it would invest over $2 billion in sustainable packaging. It pledged carbon neutrality by 2050. It launched zero-waste pilot projects, created climate-smart agriculture initiatives, and hired high-profile sustainability officers. It signed the UN Global Compact. It embraced ESG ratings. On paper, it looked like transformation, but critics called it greenwashing. Reports emerged that the sustainable packaging was still difficult to recycle in most countries, that carbon offsets were being used to delay actual emissions cuts, that child labour persisted, that water rights contracts remained untouched, that junk food products continued to dominate Nestlé's portfolio. The truth was brutal. Nestlé wasn't reforming, it was rebranding. Even so, seeds of change began to germinate not inside the corporation, but around it. In India, Nestlé was forced to withdraw its Maggi instant noodles after regulators found excessive levels of lead. The scandal sparked national outrage, consumer lawsuits, and a brief sales collapse. In Chile and Mexico, sugar taxes and front-of-package warning labels reduced consumption of ultra-processed foods, despite Nestlé's lobbying efforts. In some European countries, laws were passed limiting advertising of sugary snacks to children, another blow to Nestlé's marketing machine. Then came the rise of ethical consumption. Brands once considered invincible began to falter as younger generations demanded transparency, ethics, and accountability. Companies like Nestlé, once viewed as too big to fail, were increasingly seen as too big to trust. In response, alternatives flourished: local cooperatives, organic brands, zero-waste startups. For the first time in decades, Nestlé faced meaningful competition, not in price or distribution, but in values. And yet the scale remained daunting. Nestlé still controls over 2,000 brands. Its products are sold in nearly every country. It influences agriculture, health, education, and trade policy. Its annual revenues surpass the GDP of many nations. Even in scandal, it profits. Even in reform, it maintains control. So what would real accountability look like? It begins with law, robust, enforceable international regulations that prevent corporations from externalizing harm, that hold them accountable, not just where they are headquartered, but where their impact is felt. It means mandatory human rights due diligence laws, transparent supply chains, independent audits. It means consequences: fines, bans, dismantling of monopolistic power structures. It means science free from corporate influence, public research funded by independent institutions, guidelines shaped by health outcomes, not shareholder reports. It means media independence, journalists empowered to investigate without fear of lawsuits or ad revenue threats. It means civic education, raising generations who understand how corporations shape their world and who can act collectively to resist. But above all, it means a shift in values, a cultural reckoning. Because Nestlé is not simply a monster that rose from the lake of capitalism. It is a mirror reflecting the trade-offs we've accepted in the name of convenience. We wanted clean, fast, affordable food. We got plastic, sugar, and dependency. We wanted solutions to poverty. We got branded aid and corporate colonization. We wanted choice, but what we got was illusion. Nestlé filled a void created by broken public systems, weak regulation, and global inequality. In many ways, it did what governments failed to do, but it did so on its own terms. And those terms were always profit first. The reckoning may not come in the form of collapse. Nestlé will not vanish overnight. It may never truly fall. But that's not the point. The point is awakening. An empire built in silence only thrives in silence. But when voices rise, when truths surface, when consumers choose not just with wallets, but with purpose, then the empire must change. Not because it wants to, but because it has no choice. Nestlé's story is not over. It will continue to evolve, to adapt, to fight. But so will the resistance. And as long as we ask who benefits, who pays, and who decides, the story will no longer be Nestlé's to write alone. The final credits haven't rolled, but the narrative is no longer theirs.